Welcome to the show. Picture this. The scene's still warm, the cones are up, the paperwork's immaculate, and the investigation is already crook, because the people in it have stopped trusting the process. That's the bit we don't like saying out loud. Most investigations don't fail because there's zero evidence. They fail because the evidence goes thin. People shut up, tidy up, lawyer up, or they tell you the sanitized version that keeps them safe. And once that starts, you can have the world's prettiest template, the fanciest flowchart, a report cover thick enough to stop a bullet, and the outcome's still rubbish. We're good in safety at talking about controls, barriers, defenses, critical controls, hard controls, soft controls, containment controls, all the rest of it. But here's the uncomfortable one. Trust is a control too. Not a fluffy one, not a poster word, a real working control in the investigation process. If workers don't trust the investigator, witness accounts get shallow. If witnesses don't trust the purpose, they edit. If leaders don't trust the method, they override the findings and go hunting for the nearest mug to blame. And if nobody trusts that the organization will use the truth fairly, then the truth turns up wearing a fake moustache. The safety-wise material bangs on, rightly, about investigation as a system. 7 steps, 4 phases: goal, gather, organize, analyze, learn. The first proper phase, the G in goal, is data gathering. And the workbook says it plain. This initial phase sets the foundation for a quality investigation outcome. Essential, not optional. Because if the gather phase is weak, everything downstream is built on wet cardboard. That's why trust matters before the report ever lands on an executive desk. It shapes whether the data is relevant, accurate, and appropriate. Those are the exact words in the training material. Relevant, accurate, appropriate. You don't get that by barging in like a budget detective and treating everyone as a suspect in a police drama. A good process can still produce a bad outcome when trust is missing. I've seen investigations where the steps were followed, scene secured, interviews booked, PIPO done, timeline built, 5 whys or ICAM chart filled in nicely, but the results still smelled off. Why? Because the people feeding the process had decided the process wasn't safe for them. And that, by the way, is why I get twitchy when people say, "We've got a procedure, so we're covered." No, mate. Having a procedure is like owning a barbecue. Doesn't mean dinner's any good. You still need fuel, timing, skill, and someone not to burn the sausages. The effective investigator list from the workbook nails it. Integrity and ethics, control of emotion, communication, governance, adaptation, persistence, critical thinking. Read the opposite column, the ineffective investigator, and it's basically a field guide to how to torch trust in under 10 minutes. Predetermined outcome, personal judgment, poor communication, settling for the obvious, ignoring hard-to-interpret information. That's not investigation, that's theatre. So if trust is missing, what exactly do people stop telling you? And how quickly does the story go from evidence to performance? Witness interviews are where trust gets tested properly. Not in theory, in the room. The SafetyWise workbook says investigative interviewing is an essential skill because the aim is to get as much accurate and relevant information as possible to build a timeline and complete an effective analysis. Sounds simple? It is not simple. Human memory is fallible and malleable. Their words, and spot on. The course breaks it into encoding or perception, storage or retention, retrieval or recall, event duration, proximity, bias, trauma, elapsed time, distraction, motivation, interview skills, even interview location. In other words, witnesses are not USB sticks. You don't just plug them in and download Truth version 1.0. So what helps? Timeliness. Interview them as soon as practical after the event, not when everyone's had 3 toolbox chats, 2 rumors, and a management briefing. Privacy. Interview in a private setting. Rapport. Introduce yourself, explain your role and purpose. Plain language. No jargon, no acronym soup, no weird techno-babble that makes the witness feel dumb. And the big one, a non-blame stance. We are gathering information, not diagnosing. Again, that's straight from the material. There's a cracking little list of do's and don'ts in the workbook. Don't interview someone in shock or pain. Don't rush in unprepared. Don't engage in power games, take sides, or criticize the witness. Don't record without permission. Don't drag the thing out until their soul leaves their body. Don't use jargon they won't understand. Don't just leave them hanging at the end. Summarize, thank them, exchange contact details. And then there's the questioning hierarchy. Start broad. Free recall first. Tell me in your own words what you remember. Then, open-ended questions. Then, active listening, paraphrasing, closed questions to pin down detail, and only then, cautiously, leading questions if you're testing a reaction to existing information. Loaded questions? Bin them. If you ask, "How careless was he?" Congratulations, you've just told the witness what game you're playing. Now, if you're thinking, yeah, but people lie, sure, sometimes. But a lot of what investigators call lying is actually fear, confusion, rationalization, or memory contamination. People edit their story when they feel judged, not heard. They protect themselves from blame, from embarrassment, from being the next safety bulletin cautionary tale. I've watched interviews go sideways because the interviewer was basically doing a pantomime of authority, standing over the worker, firing closed questions, trying to catch them out, chucking in jargon like they were auditioning for CSI Industrial Estate. What do you get back? Tiny answers, defensive answers, compliant rubbish. A neat little statement with all the life squeezed out of it. Compare that with an interviewer who says, "I'm here to understand what happened and what made sense at the time." Start from the beginning of the shift. Different room, different witness, different result. Suddenly you hear about workload, confusing instructions, missing kit, time pressure, verbal-only scope changes, the supervisor being off elsewhere, the thing everybody already knew but nobody had written down. That's trust doing its job as a control. It improves the quality of the input. And if your inputs are weak, your timeline's weak, your analysis is weak, and your recommendations become the usual warm lettuce. Retrain, remind, reinforce, refresh. Which brings me to the next trap. If you use the interview to find the nearest idiot, don't act shocked when the system stays invisible. This is where ICAM and 5 Whys earn their keep, or get butchered by lazy use. Both are supposed to drive you past the first obvious human action. The SafetyWise material is blunt on this. Where human error is identified, the investigator must look beyond the error to find out why. Not maybe, must. 5 Whys, used properly, is asking why until you hit an organizational factor, a point beyond control, or you realize you need more information. ICAM takes the contributing factors from PEPO Mark II and sorts them into 4 buckets: organizational factors, task or environmental conditions, individual or team actions, and absent or failed defenses. That structure matters because it stops you stuffing everything into operator error and going home early. James Reason's model sits underneath all this. Latent conditions from management decisions, practices, cultural influences. Local triggering conditions like weather, location, workload. Active failures at the sharp end, errors and violations. Incidents are multivariate. SafetyWise says it plainly. They don't generally happen because of one single root cause. That's why single cause thinking is for fairy tales and LinkedIn hot takes. Take the simple 5 Whys example from the workbook. Driver runs a red light, collision. Lazy conclusion? Driver failed to stop. Better question? Why was the light hard to see? Overgrown tree. Why wasn't it trimmed? Work delayed. Why? Elevated work platform out for repair, no spare. Root cause? Ineffective maintenance management. See the difference? Design of the game, not just the player in it. Or the cable misidentification case study. You could stop at worker terminated cables wrongly. Plenty do, but the real findings were verbal scope only. No formal process for testing in scope. No labelling requirement aligned with standards. Project changes on the fly without formal review. No independent QA function. Tight timing. Contractor management and communication deficiencies. That's a system talking, if you listen. The sharp turn is this. When leaders say the only thing they trust is punishing the worker, what they actually trust is a shortcut, a lazy one. They're not trusting evidence, they're trusting the emotional relief of having somebody to pin it on. Fast, simple, satisfying. And usually dead wrong as a prevention strategy. Fair and just culture matters here, but only after the investigation. The SafetyWise courses are crystal clear on that. Fair and just culture is not a replacement for systemic investigation. It's not the opening move. You do not start with accountability theatre and work backwards. You investigate first. Then, if there's uncertainty about accountability, you use the fair and just process. Separate process, after the investigation. That's because disciplining honest mistakes does little to improve system safety. Again, that's in the governance material. Distinguish slips, lapses, mistakes from intentional violations. Reward above and beyond behaviour too, not just punish risk. Otherwise, people learn one thing: keep your head down and say bugger all. So yes, individuals matter. Errors and violations matter. But if your investigation ends at the nearest bloke with dirty boots, you haven't found cause, you've found a person. And people are always easier to rewrite than systems. Which is handy for management. Until the next incident turns up from the exact same conditions they said were isolated. Let's talk leadership, because this is where trust gets either built properly or set on fire with a corporate flamethrower. The governance workbook ties incident investigations directly to due diligence. Officers need to know WHS matters, understand operations and risks, ensure resources and processes exist, respond promptly to incident information, comply with obligations, and verify the whole lot. Not nod at a dashboard. Verify. Big difference. And the material gives practical links to incident management. Monitor significant incident reports. Ensure WHS matters from reported and investigated incidents get considered at executive meetings. Pay attention to corrective actions that highlight resource allocation problems. Audit hazard and incident reporting systems. Ensure actions apply the hierarchy of controls so far as reasonably practicable. That's leadership behaviour, not leadership branding. Silence after incidents matters too. One of the SafetyWise articles nails this. Leadership silence sends a message, whether intended or not. If leaders go quiet, delay, or talk only in legal safe mush, workers read it fast. The organisation cares more about optics than learning. Trust drops through the floor. Then there's mixed messages. Safety always on the wall. Can you just get it done in the corridor? Follow the procedure until production gets wobbly. The fair and just decision chart in the workbooks has a line I wish more people took seriously. Passive tolerance of violations. If leaders see non-compliance drifting into normal work and do nothing, that isn't neutral. That's permission wearing a high-vis vest. You see it in the examples. History of speeding on site unaddressed. Safe working practices around mobile plant ignored and unchecked. Previous incidents and non-compliance inadequately managed. No follow-up of key actions from previous rollovers. That's not bad luck, that's drift. That's leadership deciding, bit by bit, what it will tolerate. And when leaders don't resource the system properly, they burn trust twice. First, before the incident, no enough people, no QA, no formal training, no review time, no proper change process, no suitable rooms or support for investigation. Then, after the incident, recommendations sit open, no closeout, no verification, no feedback loop. Workers notice. They always notice. I've said it before, saying safety matters is free. Proving it costs time, money, attention, and occasionally the courage to annoy someone important. Funny how many organisations love the first bit and develop a rash at the second. Management input should be strongest at planning and recommend stages. SafetyWise says provide terms of reference and adequate resources up front. Then make sure recommendations are supported by analysis. Relevant, practical, risk-assessed, allocated to a responsible manager, and set to a time frame. That's governance, not asking for a one-page summary and then shelving the awkward parts. Trust grows when leaders are visible, timely, and consistent. Speak early, explain what's happening, back the methodology, protect the integrity of the process, fund the fixes, close the actions. Tell people what changed. If you don't, all you've done is hold an expensive autopsy. And once leadership has told the organization, by action or inaction, whether the truth is welcome, that's exactly the quality of truth the tools are going to get. PIPO, timelines, 5 whys, ICAM charts. These are good tools, bloody good actually, but they are not magic. They only work if people believe in them enough to feed them honest, credible information. PIPO starts with Mark 1. Brainstorm the data sources across people, environment, equipment, procedures, organization. About 20 minutes, says the guide. Don't decide answers yet, just map the sources. Then Mark 2. Gather facts, validate them with evidence, and separate contributing from non-contributing. That distinction is crucial. Facts are not all causes. Dates, times, locations can be factual and still non-contributory. If trust is low, what happens? PIPO fills up with stories, assumptions, and everyone knows statements. You get broad allegations instead of validated facts. The workbook is clear. All data must be supported with appropriate evidence for validation. If not, it's not strong enough. Timelines are the same. In theory, they organize the sequence, help resolve conflicting information, and expose gaps. Start at the incident, where control was first lost. Work backwards far enough, then forwards until the hazard is under control. Specific dates and times where possible. But if your interviews are dodgy, your timeline becomes fan fiction with timestamps. And 5 whys? Same issue. The training material practically waves a warning flag. It's not a shortcut. You still need good data. Results are subjective, can follow one causal chain, and success relies on asking the right problem question. If trust is weak, the why chain just walks politely toward the answer management wanted on day one. ICAM analysis is more disciplined, but again, only as good as the inputs. You transfer contributing factors from PIPO Mark II into the analysis buckets, use check questions, code them, and build the pathway. Absent or failed defenses. Individual or team actions. Task or environmental conditions. Organizational factors. Great, but if the underlying data is thin because workers were guarded, leaders were defensive, and investigators were biased, the chart will still look professional while saying very little. That's why poor trust investigations nearly always end with soft recommendations. More training, better communication, remind workers, review procedure, toolbox talk, maybe a poster if someone's feeling artistic. Meanwhile, the hierarchy of controls is sitting there like an ignored adult in the room, begging for elimination, substitution, engineering, isolation. The report writing guidance says recommendations should focus on the design of the game, not the player. Exactly right. It also says quality reports depend on strong PEEPO, a proper transition into analysis, understanding the basic cause, where control was lost, and consistent use of standards. Again, standards don't save you if the trust signal is dead. You can always tell when an organization has low trust in investigations. The report is polished, the lessons are generic, and somehow the system gets away with a stern talking to while the front line gets homework. So if the tools aren't the problem, and the process isn't the problem, how do you rebuild enough trust to get back to actual learning? You rebuild trust the same way you lose it, through behavior, repeatedly, not with a launch video. First, move faster on the human stuff. Interview witnesses as soon as practical. Explain who you are, what the process is, why you're there, and what will happen next. Use plain language. Ask permission before recording. Offer privacy. Allow support people where needed. Summarize at the end. Let them review notes. Give them contact details. Close the loop if you need clarification. None of that is revolutionary. It's just respectful. And respectful is believable. Second, be transparent about method. Tell people you're using PEPO to gather facts across people, environment, equipment, procedures, organisation. Tell them you'll build a timeline. Tell them ICAM or 5 whys is being used to understand why, not who to blame. The more visible the structure, the less it feels like a secret trial. Third, separate investigation from accountability. Fair and just culture is a trust signal when used properly after the investigation, not as a dodge and not as a threat. Investigate first. Understand slips, lapses, mistakes, routine or situational violations, organisational influences. Then, if needed, run the separate, fair and just process consistently. If you blend them together, everyone hears one thing. Talk carefully. Punishment is coming. Fourth, make corrective actions visible. Recommendations should be smarter, specific, measurable, accountable, reasonable, timely, effective, reviewed. Assign owners, set timeframes, use the hierarchy of controls properly. And then, this is the bit many places forget, show progress. If a worker gave you the ugly truth about missing barriers, vague scope, no formal training, poor supervision, or passive tolerance of violations, and 6 months later nothing has changed, don't expect honesty next time. Fifth, close the organisational learning loop. SafetyWise talks about key learnings not being a rehash of recommendations. Too right. Share the higher order learning across the business, not just the site, not just the crew. If similar incidents, audit findings, or previous actions were missed, say so. That honesty, oddly enough, builds confidence. People trust organisations that can admit they missed something more than ones pretending every failure was unprecedented. And leaders, this bit's for you. Don't disappear after sign-off. Management review matters. Monitor implementation. Analyse effectiveness. Archive properly. Verify. Speak to the people involved. If corrective actions aren't fully implemented, maintain monitoring until they are. The governance workbook practically writes your to-do list for you. Last thing, stop managing appearances. Zero harm slogans, title debates, maturity curve mythology, all that decorative nonsense. None of it can substitute for a system people trust enough to tell the truth into. If workers think incident management exists to protect the brand, the executive, or the monthly stats, then the organisation isn't managing risk, it's managing theatre. And that's the question I'll leave you with. When the next incident happens, will your people trust the investigation enough to tell you what really happened? Or just enough to help you look good?